over the years, I've met a lot of wood turners, and it seems to me that wood turners fall into 4 categories with respect to pen turning. There are some people that are really avid pen turners. We met a fellow down at a craft show in Providence a couple years ago who had a booth. All he had was pens at his booth, and he had about 200 to 300 pens on display, and they used a wide variety of the kits that you can buy at various places. And then sort of on the opposite end of the pen turning spectrum, there are a lot of wood turners who've never turned a pen during the time they've worked on a lathe and never intend to. And I think Beth and I fall somewhere in between. We've turned a small number of pens most years for about 20 years now. I bought the pen making supplies after I'd been turning for a couple years just out of curiosity. And then the fourth group would hopefully have some people in the club here that would be interested in doing some pen turning, but they would really like to know what they need to do to get started and how much the equipment costs. So what we're going to try to do here is we will do a little turning, but I'm going to talk a lot about what you need to do, what equipment you need to do pen turning, where you go to get that equipment, and some suggestions about the types of kits and blanks that you can use. And so the 3 suppliers that probably carry the most pens and pen supplies and pen kits are Penn State Industries down in Pennsylvania, the Woodturning catalog, which is probably the biggest wood turning online place that you can go to get any sort of equipment, all the way from lathes to pen kits. And then there's a company called Arizona Silhouettes, which is Barry Gross's company, and he falls into the avid pen turner that, as far as I know, that's about all he does besides running his company and going to the wood turning shows and selling pen supplies and doing demos. So he's a very well-established pen turner. And so if you go to one of these catalogs, one of the first things you'll look at is pen kits. And when I talk about turning pens, the assumption is that you're using the commercial kits to make your pen. And if you look at Penn State Industries catalog, the 2024 version, they have over 120 types of pen kits in their catalog. And they range all the way from the fun line and slim line kits, which if you use those kits, you get a no frills twist pen that uses a cross refill. And so those kits cost about $3 to $4 a piece. The metal items are really only the tip and the top. And so that's the low end of pen kits. And those were what were around when Beth and I started making pens 20 years ago. So this is a acrylic pen that's been made using, this is a kit called a comfort kit, which is slightly larger diameter than a slimline kit. Okay, and so what you get is a clip that goes in the pocket, a top, a separator, and the tip at the end, and the pen just works by twisting it. And those take 7 millimeter metal tubes on the inside. And so at the opposite extreme of pen kits, you'll find that there's some pen kits in there that cost $50 a piece. And so you might say, what's the difference between a $3 kit and a $50 kit, other than price? And so, so one of the differences is that the $50 kit happens to be a fountain pen kit, and it's even the non-fountain pen version of that kit runs about $30. And so the other thing you get in going from a $3 kit to a $20 and up kit is you get a lot more metal exposed on the outside of the pen The tops tend to be the parts that are metal that are decorative are much larger, and the part that gets turned by you in the shop gets to be smaller, so that by the time you're on those upper level pen kits, about 1/3 of the length of the pen is what you've made, and the rest is what you've bought.
The other thing is they're sort of niche pens. So there's ones that just have little cats on them, and there's ones with little dogs, and there's firemen and policemen,
doctors, lawyers.
And so you're paying for it being different than just the simple metal pieces.
Right. And so Beth and I don't use any of those niche pen kits because when we're at a craft sale, we have 9 total pens on display at any one time. And so we want the pens that we show to appeal to a broader audience rather than just the one doctor that swings by in the day to get a doctor pen. So if you then go look at the kits, what you will find is that there are a wide variety of kits that are more generic, and they're upgrades from the old Funline kits. And so here's a few of the types of kits that Beth and I use these days. And so this one's called a designer kit. The barrels are larger. It is a 2-barrel kit, and it's again a twist mechanism. This is a deer antler pen. The white part is the deer antler. A lot of the kits in Penn State have some bullet type fronts. I made about 5 of these probably 4 years ago, and I think I've sold 2. So this kit hasn't been one that we'll ever make again, I would say. But it's a click mechanism, and the pen works quite well. The next 2 here, this is you'll notice that rather than being 2 barrels, it's a single barrel. This kit is called a Cortona kit. If you look through again those catalogs, you'll see that they're basically 1 barrel and 2 barrel kits. And this is another Cortona. And so if you're going to get started pen turning, what I would advise you to do is pick 1 or 2 styles that you're interested in making, and buy, the number of kits where you start getting price breaks. So, 1 to 4 pens, the kits all cost the same. They reduce at 5 to 20 kits, and then there's further reductions as you go on up. One reason for doing this is that every time you buy a kit, you have to buy a pair of bushings.
Every type of kit.
Right. Each has its own separate bushings, and you need a bushing that fits your pen, the type you're doing when you do the turning, or you'll find that the wood doesn't match up with the metal parts. And those bushings do 2 things. For all the kits that have a larger barrel and a larger metal tube on the inside, those have to fit the standard 7 millimeter mandrels. And so part of the bushing centers that larger tube on the mandrel. The other thing they do is that they have basically the part of the metal that sticks up from the mandrel is you turn your wood or whatever down to the point that it joins up with that. And I'll show you more, but this is a pen mandrel, and the part here in the center is 7 millimeters, and that fits the smallest of the pen kits that are currently available. So pick out some pen kits. We have a large selection of pen kits that were picked out by someone else.
It's going to be the year of the pen.
I believe that that it looks to me like a lot of those kits were Craft Supplies, the Woodturning catalog kits, rather than Penn State kits, because I don't recognize some of the names. So the next thing you need in terms of supplies to make a pen is you need a pen blank. And if you go to the Penn State, you'll see that there's basically 4 big classifications of pen blanks. There are wooden pen blanks that are non-stabilized, non-dyed. Those generally sell for about $2 a piece or something like that, unless you really get an exotic wood. I noticed they had snakewood pen blanks for $8 a piece. And they're olive wood pens where they claim the olive wood came from the Holy Land. There's those the wood is about 50 cents, but the certificate costs you $5. Okay, the next category of blanks are the acrylics, and Penn State Industries probably has hundreds of different versions of these. Here's just a bin that came out of the box over there. And these happen to all be Penn State Industries acrylic blanks. Yeah. And some of the acrylic blanks, like this one here that they found over, has stars cast into it.
Flags
And
coffee beans.
these ones that have complicated patterns, well, go back a second. These acrylic blanks start off at about 6 inches long. It's enough to make any pen you want to make and have leftovers. And the simple acrylic blanks are $4 to $5 a piece. Ones like this are more likely to be about $10. So the next category is, that's just another acrylic blank.
No.
Nope. What is that?
So there's acrylic blanks, which are like what he held up before, and then there's different plastics. So for example, this is probably what they call polyester. And I can say, which I was showing, it's my turn, much more chippy. If you're just starting and you want something with the plastic, stick with the acrylic. Because the things that are not acrylic are a lot harder to work with.
Okay, so some woods are not sturdy enough to make pens out of. A great example is buckeye burl. That's just too soft. The pen would basically fall apart. So what they've done on that is that they have a whole series of pen blanks that are stabilized. Those tend to be burls, and like buckeye burl. And they're also dyed. So the buckeye burl pen blanks get dyed in probably a half a dozen different colors. They have figured maple that also they dye. Those blanks run about $8 to $10 a piece. And then the final category are cast pen blanks that have other things in them. And so they actually have these pen blanks with alligator jaws cast with different colors of plastic. I've never used any of those, but they're about $25 a piece. And they have ones that combine a casting resin like Alumilite with pieces of eucalyptus burl. And our own John Burke makes his own versions of those. And within the last couple months, I started doing some casting because I cast a few pen blanks years and years ago, but I didn't have a nice mold to do it in. So we bought this. This is a one where you can either cast a solid blank or you can cast one with the metal tube already in, where you take 2 of these guys and have the metal in between them, and you just pour your liquid in there. And so some of the pens that I've had here were ones where I've done that, not had a tube in ahead of time. Just took a piece of burl. This happened to be giant mallee burl. If I brought in a piece of this burl, you would see it's a lot like Swiss cheese. This wood was would not be, it couldn't have been drilled without stabilization, because there was just big hunks like this piece right there that wasn't attached to anything else. And so that's just the fill there is West System epoxy that I dyed with Pearl X, which is a powdered pigment that you just mix in with the epoxy. If you're familiar with West System epoxy, it's 1 squirt of the resin, 1 squirt of the hardener, and about half a teaspoon of Pearl X. And you can get Pearl X at various places. This one is a cholla cactus skeleton. It was also undrillable ahead of time. It's cholla that I had collected out in New Mexico, standing dead chollas, and the cholla skeleton was already well on the process of decaying, and so it wasn't particularly strong anymore. This one, which I was pleased with, this is actually a chunk of deer antler that's cast into the pen. And I had bought some deer antlers that were white-tailed deer from Texas. They were shed antlers. Turns out that white-tailed deer have really small antlers, and so just getting a piece long enough to make a barrel this long, out of that there would be 1 usable piece per antler, which is where it attaches to the head. Everything else is too curved. So this one couldn't have been used for a regular pen, but it came out okay as a cast one. This is a Tasmanian white top burl. It had voids in it. A lot of those voids weren't connected. So in that case, after the pen was turned, I filled it with brass. I don't actually buy pen blanks at all. We make all of our pen blanks because I have a full shop, and I have lots of exotic turning blocks that I can cut to make my own pen blanks. And they come out better, I would say, than the commercially available non-stabilized wooden blanks, because I probably got better starting wood. And this is one that Beth started making. We had gotten a piece of some teak flooring in the wood swap about 15 years ago, cut-offs from a flooring project, and the person installing the floor had decided that what he didn't like was the burls that were in the teak flooring, so he cut all the burls out. And so we can just take a piece of that teak burl, and if there are voids in it, we can do a metal fill on it too. So, yes.
Do you have to pressurize those that you cast?
No, these were not. These were cast entirely on the bench top. I don't have a pressure pot, and I don't have a vacuum pot.
Do you vibrate?
You know what I would do is that I would, when you use one of these devices, you've got to use this stuff. This is a release thing so that your pen blank doesn't get terminally stuck in your pen mold. And so then you put whatever you're going to try to cast into it, and then mix the epoxy and pour it up. And then what I would do on the cholla one, for example, is I had a little piece of metal that was just came from a barbecue skewer, and I just kept rotating the cholla skeleton in the trough here until the air bubbles all had risen to the surface. Same with the deer antler. On the wooden ones, the side I put, so I'm doing ones that are a mixture of a burl, where the burl isn't big enough to make the entire pen blank. It's too short. So I put the solid part on the bottom all the time. And because I don't really care whether the epoxy gets under that solid portion, but the gaps are all up at the top. And again, using this poker, I go along the surface and knock any big air bubbles out. So this worked out. I used to try to cast pen blanks in a vertical orientation using plastic plumbing tubes as my casting chambers. I'd done some with the cholla cactus skeleton last fall. They looked fine. I put them on the lathe, and they were just full of so many air bubbles that had not cleared going vertical because I didn't have any good way of moving the blank around. And so those were useless. They just got tossed because there were like 10% at least by volume air bubbles in the pen. So wouldn't have looked good.
Reid,
Yeah.
you have standard thickness viscosity epoxy. It's enough time not to.
Oh, this West system, which is one that boat builders use, it's becomes after about 2 hours. If you poke your finger in it, it still feels tacky on the top. You can't push into it at that point, but I let it go overnight before even considering taking it out of the mold. So it has a cure time for about an hour to 2, I would say, before it gets to be too heavy.
So when you say stabilized, you're not doing cactus juice.
No,
You're just using the resin
to fill voids.
And are you baking the blanks to get the moisture out of them, or are you just doing it with the mat?
Okay, I was going to talk about moisture next, so thanks for bringing that up. So if you cut pen blanks, you have another question?
Yeah, about the epoxy, do you use like the straight up West system, or would you use the penetrating epoxy?
I just use the straight up West system. I ordered it from Amazon. I used to buy it from a boat supply place that was on Route 20 in Worcester. But
Do you have to, for the ones that you put the tube inside and you then create them, do you have to prep the tube in any way before you pour the epoxy?
oh, okay. So the tube, I have a blank tube here.
It's just harder to do because more things get trapped under.
So it just fits on these little nipples that come out. And so this is probably one that's for 7 1/8, which this is an 8 millimeter barrel, and this one would be some of the larger barrels. So far, we have not had a lot of success using complicated woods with a pen like cholla. Just didn't work out when we tried to do it that way either, because all the air bubbles that were beneath never cleared. So we haven't really used this option yet, and I probably won't right away at least. Okay, so back to moisture. So if you do cut your own pen blanks, you really need to make sure that the wood you're using is at least a shop dryness. It would be preferable if it was kiln dried wood. This one happened to be cut from a piece of turning stock. The ends of this piece of turning stock had been wax sealed, but the sides had been unwax sealed, and I'd had it in my basement for probably 10 years. So the entire blank is reached shop dryness, which is what you need to do. If, for example, you got a piece of nice ambrosia maple from a freshly cut tree and decided you wanted to make pen blanks out of that, the first thing I would recommend doing is cutting it down to pen blank size, which is 3/4 by 3/4, and then some length that you'll know is going to be plenty long. And then I would let that shop dry in that form for a couple of months. At that point, I would drill it, and then we put all of our pen blanks, particularly those that have been used with turning stock that's entirely wax sealed, into our bowl dryer and without the tube being in yet, and let it go for a couple weeks. The other way you could do it would be microwave drying those pen blocks. When it comes out, you need to then take the metal tube and go in. If it's tight now, you need to re-drill that blank. The way I learned this was unpleasant. I bought some snakewood cutoffs. This is again about 10 years ago. They were all really small. The biggest ones were 5/8 of an inch, which is big enough for some of the smaller diameter pens. And I cut them, drilled them, glued them, made the pen, looked at it a month later, and there was a crack going down the barrel. So a couple days ago, I got this snakewood out of the box again, drilled them, and noticed that my drill bit was causing something to evaporate and that I could see coming off as clouds as I drilled those pen blanks. They still may not be totally dry. It's something about snakewood that must cause it to retain moisture a ridiculously long time. But the problem is by the time you get done with the pen, the wooden part is, you know, a 1/16 of an inch to an 1/8 of an inch thick. If that's going around a piece of metal that can't move and it continues to dry, it's going to crack, and it's very hard to repair those. In fact, those became our snakewood pens because we couldn't rescue them for a sale.
But one other thing I was going to, the other thing he's learned the hard way is you cannot rush the curing of the epoxy by putting it at a warmer temperature. It boils.
Yeah, depending on how tall it is, if epoxy during the polymerization part, if it gets too warm or you've made a form that's too deep, you can actually get epoxy hot enough that it'll boil out of the form. So that's the other reason that horizontal casting works better than vertical casting, is you have a much larger surface area to give off heat. And so I've not had any problem using this to cast pens, but in the vertical configuration, I've had foam ups just because the epoxy gets too hot. Okay, so if you've got, yes?
When you drill it, do you use the special sizes or the special drills that they sell, or?
That's a great next, so drilling is the next topic I wanted to get to. And so there's, in terms of equipment that I don't think you want to get, some of the pen kits have vices that you can mount on your drill press to allow you to drill the pen blank on the drill press. They even had one at one point that I found in an old craft supply catalog that would mount a regular hand drill in this contraption, and you would drill down from above. That's one of the, in my opinion, one of the stupidest possible ways to drill a pen. So what we use, or what we used to use all the time, and there's one of those. Have at it. You can just use normal pin jaws on any chuck, you know, so it'll be 4 jaws, and that'll work perfectly fine if your blank is square. And we drilled pens that way for a long time. A couple years back, we bought one of the Barracuda chucks that Penn State sells because they're a nice small chuck for a mini lathe. And when you buy one of their chucks, it comes with like 5 or 6 jaws already, so you're not buying individual jaws. And this is one of the jaws that they sell with that Barracuda, and it's a pen drilling jaw. And so how is this better than a standard 4-jaw pin chuck? Well, the pen's blanks just slide right in, but they're only held between 2 positions. And you'll notice this doesn't even look remotely square. And if you buy acrylic blanks, some of them are square, some of them are rectangular. And so if you were to try to do this one in a 4-jaw chuck, the pen you may not have it oriented properly. It's certainly not going to be very stable, and it could actually shift around during the drilling process. So what's nice with this thing is you only have two of the four corners being held, and so it centers. These jaws and this type of a chuck, I would say, are non-essential. The other solution to that problem is just take this over to your bandsaw and square it up so that it fits in the 4-jaw chuck.
The only thing I would add is some of the pen blanks need to be longer than your drill bit, and so I always mark which corners are in here so that when I reverse it, I don't use the other set of corners.
Yeah, because then it's like the people that used to build tunnels through mountains for, the train or the automobile traffic and found out that, well, they missed. So anyway. So your question was, do we use the pens, the bits that the companies sell? And yes, we do. And the reason for that is that a lot of the sizes are metric sizes. And even if you happen to have a set of metric drill bits, there's a reasonable chance that some of the bits are not particularly accurate in terms of I have a set that we bought from Grizzly, I guess, many years ago, so I'm sure it was made in China. And the 8mm bit, if you measure it, is about 8.2. And so when you drill a pen blank, you want it so that this is the one that doesn't, that the metal tube fits snugly and you don't have tear out at the end. Beth, who does drilling of all the acrylic blanks, because she uses them not just for pens, but for other projects that use mandrels, notes that if you let your bit get too hot when you're drilling acrylic, that by the time you get to the end, you're actually melting the acrylic, and now your hole, which you were hoping would be 8mm, may be closer to 10 by the time you get to the end of the bit. And then that one is going to cause problems during drilling. Any other questions about drilling? Yes?
I run into with the acrylic, you're going to make sure your flute is, your drill bit, you're constantly clearing it, because many of one never made it to the end.
Yeah, this is an extremely good point. Acrylic, there's two things that can happen. One is that the whole blank can split if you're, rushing it and not clearing your flutes. The other thing is that it can get so hot that the drill bit is melting the plastic and then it gets stuck. And so getting a stuck drill bit out of plastic is not fun. But if it ever happens to you, try pouring acetone down the flutes. She's got one stuck last year, and that's how I got our drill bit back out.
I mean, the other thing is, because it heats up, I know it's like I can do 5 turns before it gets hot. I pull it out, I wait. I sometimes have a book, read a few pages, go in for 5.
She has a little fan blowing at the drill bit too, to help it cool down faster between. So drill carefully and you'll get a bit that well fits. I'm not going to do a drill step today. You don't want to watch me drill, but I would back that out many times. So the next step is the gluing step. And so there's a couple options here. You can glue pen blank, the tubes in using epoxy, or you can use super glue. I've always used epoxy. We use a 15-minute epoxy rather than the 5-minute epoxy, because if we're doing a whole bunch of blanks, like 10 or 15, I have a good chance of getting all of them glued up before the epoxy starts to set up. And there's really nothing quite as much fun as trying to shove a pen blank, a tube in, when the glue is already starting to set up.
Other thing is, pen tube.
Yeah, so you'll notice that this has a scratched surface. Most of the pen tubes you buy these days are pre-scratched. If you, in that bin, end up with ones that aren't pre-scratched, take like 100 grit sandpaper and just go like this. And the whole point in doing that is have scratches for the epoxy to sort of sink into and help join the blank to the metal tube. Now, another thing that can sort of go wrong in the gluing process in terms of getting those glued blanks onto your pen mandrel is that during the process you may end up with glue inside the pen tube. And one thing you can do that helps a lot is that Craft Supplies sells sheets of the beeswax that's used by beekeepers to make sure the bees make an organized comb. And so you'll see their little hexagon holes just the right size for honey. But what you do is go like this and get wax in both sides. And that way, when you're putting this into the tube, you're really going to reduce the amount of wax that's going into, reduce the amount of epoxy that's going in. And I'm going to pass this blank around, except that's not the one. It's where's the plastic one? Yeah. So this is what a good fit looks like. Oh, back to cutting blanks. You always cut them a little bit longer than the pen tube. And one reason to do that is on acrylic, oftentimes when you get to the very end of the blank, the last bit of plastic breaks out rather than cuts clean. And so you don't want a big expansion at the end. So, just like on the Julia Child's cooking shows, the metal tube has now been glued into the blank, and the next step, and this is the first piece of required equipment you need, is some sort of a barrel trimmer. And this is what a barrel trimmer looked like 20 years ago. This part is 7 millimeters. This thing is only useful for doing the slimline type kits. And it actually is the right fit for this one, but since it's all hand powered, it takes a long time to trim a barrel. And so the only thing we use this one still for is if there's any epoxy that made it through the beeswax, you can use this part, the very tip here, to sort of scratch that out. What we use is what's called a universal barrel trimmer. And that's this device right here. And what you get with it is there's a four-sided cutting head which does the barrel trimming, and then you've got the tip up here which cleans out anything that's within the barrel itself. Glue again. And it comes with 4 different sizes, which is the major sizes for pens. So that's a 7 millimeter. I've got an 8 millimeter in there now. This is a 10 millimeter, and this one isn't labeled. I think it's like 3/8 or something like that. So this works very good. You can buy this with either a steel cutting head. Now they sell them also with carbide cutting heads. They just fit into a small set of jaws like this. I've already actually cleaned up, right after the gluing step, I cleaned up this side. I then took it over to the table saw, cut it to length so that the metal pen barrel is right at the end there. If this hole was going completely straight down the pen blank, you technically wouldn't need to barrel trim on the other end. But if there's any deviation along the way, you do need to do it. So we're just going to turn this on. And that looks pretty good.
What is it you're looking for?
What we're looking for, I'm going to pass this around. On the side that I did at home where there's still some glue, you can see there's a flattened circle in the inside. And what I really want to go to, and it didn't quite get there, to the point that the circle also you can see all on the other side. And I'll pass this around. Cost on that item was, I think, $39.99. You can get it with carbide bits, $45.99 as the cutter head. And now they have one that uses the square carbide bits that are used by Easy Wood Tools, where they're replaceable, and I think that was $79.99. So this is probably the most expensive tool that you really need for pen making. So now we have a bit that's ready to go, a blank that's ready to go. You know, the other one that, oh, actually I can't pass that around because that's the blank I'm using. Yes, and so this one, I've sharpened it once, it needs sharpening again. And so I take a diamond file and go along that. I bought a little kit years ago for sharpening Forstner bits, and it uses, what it is, it's a small piece of metal that's got diamond grit on both sides. There's a fine side and a rough side. You put some honing oil on it and then sharpen those up. And that one definitely needs sharpening again. Okay, so the next item is the mandrel, which is
On the other side of the end of the way.
oh, okay. So this is not the first pen mandrel that Beth and I bought. The other ones are in a landfill somewhere. So what pen mandrels have is on one side there's a Morse taper. Number 2 is the most common side, but for some lathes they also have a Morse 1 taper mandrel, I guess. Anyway, that goes in there. The other end is designed to use the aluminum part of a live center cone. There's a little dimple down there. Now what we like about this particular pen mandrel is that it's adjustable. I've already got the bushings on for the pen I'm going to turn. They're Cortona bushings. And so you just put the barrel up, slide the bushing on, a couple spacer bushings, and you'll see there I barely have the last spacer bushing going on to this threaded area. So I have a little bit more of the mandrel sticking out than I would like. So what I'm going to do now is loosen this up and send it in a bit. They still sell the non-adjustable type of mandrel. Mandrels are under $20. This adjustable one I think sells for $1 more than the non-adjustable. The big advantage of the adjustable one is if you don't have an adjustable one, you have to keep a whole set of these spacer bushings, and you're continually taking them off and on. And so this way we only need like 2. Okay, now to hold your blank in place, you tighten up the brass wheel. And you really tighten that down good because that keeps your blank from spinning. The next piece of recommended material you get is what's called a mandrel saver. And that's this device right here. I'll just pop that out. It's a live center, of course, and you'll notice there's an indent, there's a hole at the end of this which is slightly bigger than the end of that mandrel. Now, what happened to our previous mandrels, that they're in a landfill somewhere? Well, the problem is that it's very easy to put too much tension on your tailstock, and that eventually will cause the mandrel to actually distort. And once you have an out-of-round mandrel, what you'll notice is that when it looks like you've turned your pen down to the bushing size, you stop the lathe and you'll see that on one side of the bushing, the wood is still sticking out, and on the other side it may have already passed the point of no return. So you end up with pens that aren't quite right. So in this case, you just put enough tailstock pressure on to the point where the mandrel spins. The other thing the mandrel saver does is, here's a live center cone that was used with the old, with a mandrel, and you'll notice the tip of the live center cone has a groove that's been cut by the end of the mandrel. And so that saves your live center. It also saves the mandrels. Now, we actually don't use that one very much because I decided I built one myself that goes on to, I have a one-way live center that you can screw off the aluminum part, and then there's a 1/4 inch 8 TPI thread there. And so I took a piece of polypropylene plastic, I believe, turned this, tapped it, turned it, and then drilled a hole in it that's just slightly larger than the end of the mandrel. But I forgot, I meant to bring that with attached to a live center and didn't. But you can make this, if you have the plastic and the tap, for a lot less than that part. This part costs like $25. Okay, so now some actual turning. I'm going to basically use 2 tools to do this. You could start with a bowl gouge. I'm going to start with a spindle gouge. Get my face mask. Spade. We want to be going fast here because small diameter. If I was turning a pen that was from one of those cast blanks, I would have stopped it and looked at it, looking for any air pockets or any other problems. But this is Bacote. It's one of the easiest woods in the world to turn, I think. It's nice and dense, but it never gives you any surprises. At least I don't think it will. So once I've got it rounded out and approaching the diameter I want, I switch over to a skew chisel. What shape you pick is entirely up to you. For our Cortona pens, I don't like the barrel to be straight all the way. I like a little bulge in the center. Okay, so if we're at home, I would now sand this. And I would probably start at about 150 to 180 grit, go up to 400, and then it's ready to come off the pen mandrel for now. It'll eventually need a finish, but this is the point in the demo where I turn it over to Beth, who's eventually going to do a super glue finish, but she's also going to do a little bit on the acrylic blanks.
Reid,
Yes?
question about the bushings.
Yeah.
You say the bushings are specific to pen kit.
Yes.
Do they come with the pen kit, or do you have to?
Great question. So generally, if you, at least in Penn State, which is where we buy ours from, they usually have, if you pick out a pen style, among the options, you can buy just the individual kits, or you can buy what they call a starter kit. And the starter kit, well, so when I say a pen kit, that pen kit can come with several different options for the metals. It could be 24 karat gold, it could be polished chrome, it could be titanium, it can be copper, it can be gunmetal. And so the starter kits will often be one each of the various metal types that's available for that pen kit, and it will include the bushings for that pen kit. The bushings are sold separately if you don't want the starter kit. Bushings are generally just about $5 a pair. If you get into pens, you need a way to keep your bushings labeled and organized so that the next time you go to make a, let's say a Big Ben pen kit, you aren't looking through a bunch of unlabeled bushings and trying to use your calipers to see which one has the right diameter.
I typically use a tackle box.
Yeah.
And a label maker just to label, okay, that's for this, this is the designer bushing, this is a Mesa, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Now, do you trim your blank if your tube is a little bit shorter than your?
Yes, you always trim it to the length of the tube.
So how do you do that now? Do you use?
I do that on the table saw.
That's with the barrel trimmer.
And
You use
so
the barrel
basically-
trimmer on that?
What?
Do you-
Barrel trimmer.
Oh, the barrel trimmer is just for sort of getting the very end. They don't cut fast enough to take off like an extra eighth of an inch.
That's what I mean, the 1/8 inch you to the bandsaw and
No, I do a table saw.
table saw.
And so, you know,
A bandsaw do it also.
right. I just happen to, you know, I'll have
Yeah, okay.
a miter gauge on my table saw, I'll set it
So you want the tube right to each end?
right. Yeah, if you have wood or plastic hanging over the ends, those parts can break without the reinforcement of the metal tube. Yes.
You didn't mention, but folks in my family also like pencil kits. So
Yes.
that's just something else.
Yeah.
Yeah, so a lot of the styles of pens also have available pencils. We were going through our old collection of mechanisms and found we used to make mechanical pencils, and I found 7 kits that we probably bought 20 years ago that haven't ever assembled. We get 1 or 2 people a year asking if we have any pencil kits and pencils that we've made, and I always say, no, we don't have any kits. So I found some kits. Yes?
One of the things I noticed, like the pen stain kits come with a full group of instructions.
Right.
I have bought wood crafters, and then if there's something you gotta dig around and find any info.
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's a 2-page, well, 1 page, both sides. It tells you what size blanks you need. It tells you what the orientation of the blanks needs to be relative to the bushing set. That's important for ones that have two barrels and non-identical bushings. Here's what one of these information sheets shows. This one's for the designer twist. It shows how the bushings fit and a rough shape of the various blanks. On the second page, it tells you how to assemble the kit so that it comes out looking the way it's supposed to. And we'll do a pen assembly eventually today.
Yeah, I think we're running out of time.
Well, we'll do a real quick one.
Okay, so said I do a lot of acrylics, and as I said at the beginning, there's acrylic plastic and there's other plastic. And so I don't know how to use a skew yet, let's face it, except for making grooves. What I prefer with the acrylics is to use the carbide, the easy tool type carbides, and I find that cuts a lot smoother. My problem with the skew is I can't keep it level and I start twisting into the material. And so I'll pass these around. Basically, one half is just the roughing gouge, which I rounded it, and then half of it I use the carbide tool to smooth it. And you'll notice the difference off of the roughing gouge on the texture and how good of a finish you can go to. Well, not a finish, a starting material you can get on that. I mean, I'm not actually going to turn anything because, as Francois found, it's awfully hard when you're shorter than someone like Reid to actually turn on this lathe. Yeah, not ergonomic.
Need a 3-legged milking stool then.
Yeah, well, even at home where we don't have the wheels, I do have a platform that's about yay tall that I stand on to turn. Okay.
So you're going to do a super finish, or?
We're actually not, as I said, we're running out of time, so basically.
Well, it's 8:14, so we have till when?
15 minutes.
Okay.
So basically what I like is take out the bushings that cost you so much money and you don't want covered with super glue, and get bushings that are either Teflon or these black ones, and they, you know, fit. Oh, they actually don't. Probably the other ones.
Yeah.
and they get coated with super glue, and they can knock the super glue off. The super glue system I use is the glue boost system. And so you have your blank turning, and you start using pen kits. They put every piece of the kit in another little plastic bag. And that's what I use for putting the super glue on. So I still wear gloves because it's going all over the place.
Definitely wear a face mask.
Especially if I'm doing a lot of them, my face mask can come off and I can switch it to one that's already goofed up rather than using my good face mask. And then it's simply there's a thick and there's a thin. So I put a drop here, you've got your blank spinning up and back a couple of times. Spray it with the accelerant. Let it sit for a few minutes. At that point, it's you can feel it dry. Then you can either do another coat of the thick or switch to coats of the thin. Always use a new surface of the bag. When it's done, it may not be perfectly smooth. In my case, it's usually not perfectly smooth. I find the things that work best for me on the acrylics for the super glue finish are these sort of paper ones. You can get them fairly cheap. We started with a set probably from Penn State or something, but I've got replacement ones as I use up the paper, and it comes in 400 to 8,000 grit.
And while you're doing this in the lathe spinning, you'll see that the reflection line you're getting off the pen from the lights just gets brighter and brighter and brighter as you go, because you're removing all the scratches that were set in that light other places.
Then when I've got the acrylic finished the way I like it, I apply some of this one-step plastic polish, shines it up real nice. For this, we tend to use the Blue Automotive paper towels that don't have as much lint as the stuff you use in your kitchen. And I'll do 2 or 3 coats. And then as hard as I found it to believe, to count it, actually then doing it on a polishing wheel. I thought it was so shiny, how would you need a polishing wheel? But I actually happen to have 2 blanks of exactly the same pattern, and it really was shinier after polishing.
So on this wheel, if you buy this system, there's a blue buffing compound. We don't put anything on the second wheel.
And then you're done. The only thing else I'll say is when it comes to sanding the acrylic blanks, I actually like these sanding pads better than sandpaper because it doesn't clog as much and they're washable. In the sink, I don't put them in the wash machine. But then they last a whole lot longer because acrylic really gums up regular sandpaper. And these come, goes from 120 to 1800.
Okay, so the last step is assembling the pen. And for most of the pens, the fittings are so tight that you cannot put them on with bare fingers. You're not strong enough. There's a few kits that can be assembled without a pen assembly tool. We've had 2 pen assembly tools. The first one we bought like 20 years ago had this big lever, and you would put your parts here and bring the lever down, and after about 50 pens, the metal bent and it was useless. And so we found this pen assembly kit tool at Craft Supplies. This works very, very well. And so you've got plastic that's both sides are number 2 Morse taper. You just put your barrel here, bring up the tailstock and just wind that up, and that'll force the cap on or force the tip on. It takes, 2 minutes or something to assemble a pen using this. And this is called a universal pen assembly tool that Craft Supply sells, and I think it's about $25. Yeah.
I can see my drill press.
You can do that, sure.
Very well.
Yeah. I don't use, I drill with a drill press, but yeah, that will work.
I use the same jig I use for
Yeah,
drilling.
yeah.
Put the pen back in there and it's done.
So there's lots of different ways to make pens. I was just telling you the way we do it, but you don't need to do all the steps like we do, and you can, like on the pen assembly tool, you can skip. You can use a drill press that will work just fine, save some money. So, any other final questions?
Actually, so one thing I think you forgot to explain is, so you want to put the tube in, you put a big dollop of epoxy, the 15-minute epoxy here. You go in, come out a little, and you twist it. Twist it until you push it all the way in. And I find all the tip then that came out first doesn't have enough epoxy, so I press it through a little, add an extra little epoxy and put it back.
But you don't want to have the pen metal junction fail on the ends, because that's when little pieces chip off.
So you glue the tube, not the whole body.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
I just add, if you're doing anything with an acrylic, I always paint the inside of the tube. The inside of the blanket.
Okay.
I don't want to see the brass tube when I get the pen outside.
Right. And so that's like, I actually did it the opposite way. I spray painted the tube white, but that's why I try to use acrylic so you can't see through.
But some of the acrylic planks are very transparent, and
You have to coat
if you don't coat them, you'll see the brass tube without any problem. Okay.